welcome back to my channel. Currently reading. Got a partner today for my book review of E.O.Wilson's The Naturalist. This was written back in 1994, I believe. Let me double check. Yep. So I'm here in Montana currently on a ranch, and since this is about naturalists and biology, I figured might as well do this outside with some nature and some animals. So that's funny that that he came over here to do my book review for me. Anyway, so I wanted to read this book because E.O. Wilson recently passed away in December at the age of 92. And I first heard hey there. I first heard about him back when I was an undergrad at the University of Alabama. I believe probably my roommate at the time was getting her master's in geomorphology, and E.O. Wilson was coming to campus to speak, and I think she probably told me about him. And so I went to see him speak, and it was interesting because he's from Alabama. He went to the University of Alabama for his bachelor's and master's degree, and then he went off to Harvard for his PhD and ended up becoming a Harvard professor there for about 46 years, and is probably one of the more famous scientists of the 20th century. And he's written so many books. Anyway, this is a memoir that he wrote in '94. And at that point, he was still a professor at Harvard. I believe he retired in 2002. So he was 66 when he wrote this. So obviously, you know, he died at 92. He still had a lot of life left after this and wrote a lot of books after this one. And I believe when he came to campus to the University of Alabama, when I heard him speak, I bought his book, The Creation, and was able to have him sign that there. So I hold that as pretty special to have that. And I have other books of his at home, which actually, his book Biophilia, I referenced in my thesis, in my master's thesis, when I was talking about relationship with nature, environmental behavior, a case study I did in grad school, and used his biophilia. The dog's harassing the horses. Anyway, and I used biophilia as some of my theoretical frameworks. And he talked about that in here. Let's see, what else? Anyway, I learned a lot in this book. And honestly, like, I imagine not many people would probably want to read this because it's a lot of science, and a lot of it probably did go over my head, but I think I was more interested in it just because I have known about him for such a long time, and the fact that he's from Alabama, and that I had seen him speak in person always kind of meant a lot to me. So I wanted to read this, since I've had this in my bookshelf and others of his in my bookshelf for years and just never got around to reading it. And since he recently passed, I was like, I should read this. And he basically just talks about his childhood, you know, growing up in Alabama. His parents divorced. He moved around a lot. He was like at a military boarding school for a year, and his dad moved around a lot, and so he moved around a lot, went to lots of different schools growing up. His father ended up killing himself, which was pretty tragic. E.O. Wilson was blinded in one eye when he was a child because he was fishing, and the fish jumped out and basically stabbed him in the eye. But from an early age, you know, he was really interested in animals and insects, and I guess I forgot to mention, so he's an entomologist, so study of insects, and so a lot of his work is about ants, and ants is not very glamorous, right? And so I'm like, who cares about ants? And that's like most of his research is about ants, right? And so I was never really cared about that, but he made me care about ants in this book. And anyway, so went to Alabama, went to Harvard, traveled the world. These horses are going nuts behind me. Traveled the world for research, you know, Cuba, Mexico, the South Pacific, all over studying ants. And so he talks about all that. I guess some highlights I will hit on, because, you know, like I said, a lot of the science went over my head when he's talking about evolutionary biology and sociobiology and ethology and all the ologies. And so it was a lot. But I think some of the major experiments, I mean, when he talked about his travels and for the research, that was obviously the more exciting things, because I love to travel. And when you look at it as like an explorer, he discovered, you know, new species of ants and stuff. And so that's amazing. And so some of his research, let's see, one of the things I thought was pretty cool. So he did this experiment off the coast of Florida on these mangrove islands. And I think it was about the time when he was doing this island biogeography stuff. And okay, this is like science dumbed down, right? So if you're a scientist or someone who like knows science, you know, this is probably going to be ridiculous. But anyway, so the island biogeography. So I thought this was fascinating. They basically put pesticides on these mangrove islands, you know, which are small, and killed all like the life, all the insects, everything on the island, you know. And then they had other like control islands, and they did this on several different mangrove islands off the coast of Florida, to research, like, you know, how quickly the species come back to the island. So I thought that was fascinating. And you know, the National Park Service was okay with this. Like, everybody was okay with it. And I'm like, I wonder if someone tried to do that nowadays. I feel like people would be up in arms, you know. Like, they literally hired these pesticide people to come in and like fumigate, because they tried it the first time and they weren't able to kill all the insects. And then they literally developed this thing where they could put a tent around the island to fumigate it with like even more, you know, harmful chemicals. And it was just like, wow, that they did that back in the day. You know, I guess that was probably in the 50s or 60s. And so that was a really interesting experiment. The other one I remember reading that he wrote about in here, because it is a pretty big, you know, 300 pages. He's done a lot in his life, like so much research in his life. The other one that was really fascinating was when he was looking at the pheromones on the ants and the glands that, you know, for the reasons why they would follow, you know, ants follow. And in one particular instance, so he got this chemical from one of the glands that because he noticed that the ants that died after a few days, you know, the chemical that goes off from the decomposing ant would signal to the other ants to carry that ant out of the nest and outside into the refuse pile. And what they did was they like sprinkled some of that chemical on living ants, and they noticed that did the same thing, where these ants would carry the living ants that they thought were dead because of that chemical, the pheromone or whatever, and would carry them outside like they were dead, but they were living. And I was like, that's fascinating to me. Let's see. He talked about getting into, you know, some controversy. Oh, there was also one thing. So he kind of went over was that he helped conserve an island off the coast of Florida. that was some of the, I think that was like in the Keys, one of the last remaining islands that had like natural forests that hadn't been eliminated. He helped preserve that, which I thought that was a big deal, and he didn't really talk about it that much. But he would talk about all the other scientists that he worked with and that helped author books with him and did research projects with. And it was just like, man, how many people goes into this? It's so much, and how many different people that he worked with is amazing. And what I was getting to with the controversy was when he first came out with the sociobiology stuff, when he was bringing that into talking about a reason to explain human behavior, and people got up in arms about that. Anyway, a lot of this stuff, you know, it would have been interesting to read an even more up-to-date memoir of him, since, like I said, he wrote this when he was 66 and he passed at 92, and so he was just getting into you know, in the 90s, his like environmentalism, his activism at that point. And after that, I think he wrote a lot more books about that, and you know, he was a big proponent about spreading the knowledge of biodiversity loss and all that. And so I think, and I obviously, now that he's passed, I'm sure other people will write some biographies about him and maybe go into more detail about that. But it would just be interesting to know, and also just like some of the theories and hypotheses that he had, like how that would have changed over time and how he would perceive it now. Since I'm not in that realm, there's a lot of, like I said, these ologies and these theories and stuff that he talked about that I'm like, I don't know, is that still a thing nowadays? I don't know, because, you know, in science, there's always new progress and new revelations and stuff. And so it's hard to know like where some of his work still stands with that. But anyway, if you're into any of that stuff, you would probably enjoy this. You know, I think, like I said, he's one of the major scientists of our time, and he's written probably more, I mean, obviously I don't know any other scientists really, but I think he's probably written more books than most, and he has won 2 Pulitzer Prize, which is more, you know, obviously literary than scientific. And but they were about science books, obviously. And obviously, if you like insects, he's your guy. And but anyway, it was interesting, and yeah, so maybe the next few videos will be set here on the ranch in Montana. I imagine I'll be reading a lot because there's nothing to do here. Well, I mean, it's cold, and I like to go on walks out here, but I'm gonna probably be reading a lot, so I imagine I'll probably have a lot more books to talk about while I'm here. So until next time, keep reading.